Hey Kev, how's it going?
Doing well. I can't
Nice.
complain. Enjoying my summer. How are you?
Yep, doing the same. We're both teachers. We're both off this summer. I mean, in my case, it's because the city has, and just the government in general has canceled all after school and summer school programs. So this is my first
Yeah.
summer since COVID, I guess, that I haven't been teaching summer school, and before COVID, I always taught. So yeah, this is a good time to really focus in on
Yeah.
various studies of like the one we're doing. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
it's been going well so far.
I find myself, of course, my kids are a little older, so that's different.
Yeah, mine
Um,
too. Yeah.
both of them, two of them are graduated from high school, one from college. And then I have a rising sophomore. But it gives me, I guess, a lot more time to do other things because they don't
It
want me
does.
around as
Yeah.
much anymore.
Yeah, it
Um,
does. And you're not quite the
but I,
chauffeur. Like that's your main job for many years.
No,
So
right.
yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I've kind of been kind of occupied with things. Of course we're doing this together.
Hmm.
Kind of this is our what, fifth one,
Yeah, right.
fifth
Yeah.
podcast.
I know we were thinking
And
about
then
one at one time. So this is good to
yeah,
get this set up so that even when we start back in school and stuff, that we got a kind of a flow to
yeah,
our studies. So yeah. But
yeah,
anyway.
yeah, I've enjoyed it. And I actually find Bart Ehrman, like I've heard of him. I've known about him for years, and I know you've lent me some great course CDs where he was the lecturer, um, and I enjoyed that teaching. But it wasn't until this book I started reading some of his books, and it's very like I can understand it. It's challenging, but it's not like higher academic at all. Like it's very understandable, and he's able to take, I mean, just talk about the history of hell, heaven and hell, and how it's developed in like 3,000 years, and just does it in a very understandable way. So
He really does a great job with the
he
biblical
does,
scholarship. So I'll tell
and
you,
he has.
like, of
I'm
all the
sorry, he has
people,
like
like, I think he's so
30.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, he has 30 books published for people like me. So I'll
Yeah.
stay busy. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, I think, it's a branching point too, as well. There's some other scholars that have done, really good work. But including those that have opposing opinions, there are scholars that are actual scholars that disagree with him. Not just
yeah.
talking
Oh
about
yeah,
poop balls, like whatever,
yeah,
who don't really know biblical scholarship or accept it. And I'm
yeah.
not talking about them. I'm talking about actual
Right.
biblical scholars. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can even think about the first time maybe I heard him talk was he was on the Stephen Colbert show, not the late night show, but the one on Comedy Central. I don't know if you ever
Mhm.
saw that,
No,
where
I didn't. I know of
he
it, but yeah.
yeah, he is I enjoyed it. He pretended to be like this hardcore conservative. And so
Oh,
it's
yes.
kind
Oh,
of a
Colbert did. Yeah.
yeah, it was a parody, but he had Bart Ehrman on, and it was good. I mean, it's Colbert making jokes and saying,
Yeah.
like I can chapter and verse you, and kind of talking a little smack.
Oh,
But
right.
then
Yeah.
but then he seems to be a very curious, inquisitive guy, and it was a good interview. But it's just funny how Bart Ehrman was like on a show like that.
Yeah,
But
for sure. Well, he's well known even among his enemies, and
yeah,
Colbert would not be one of his enemies.
yeah,
But like it's
yeah,
important to clarify too. I think for us, we're not atheists, so like we're not or whatever Ehrman calls himself, like basically agnostic, leaning toward atheism. But we are, in some way, people of faith that are trying to understand their faith better. But we think
yeah,
that biblical scholarship, honest biblical scholarship, and keeping us, and that's what Urban is good for, like keeping us abreast with all the latest
yeah,
developments in biblical scholarship. Basically, that's kind of the way I use him, in terms of like this study or anything else. So then, and then it's not the end of thinking for me because like, so you kind of deconstruct whatever, but like now, because I profess my faith to the God who calls himself love, I still have to see how this serves that God. This
Yeah.
deconstruction serves that God. So that yeah. Anyway, that's kind of a
Yeah.
different perspective. We're not coming at this trying to just deconstruct, basically.
Yeah, and he's definitely not. Bart Ehrman is not a guy that kind of like a Richard Dawkins or like a kind of a new atheist or like
Right. Yeah.
kind of demeans you and puts
Hmm.
people down with faith. He's not like that at all.
Right.
Like I
Yeah.
feel like he's pretty respectful because he was once kind of evangelical too, and but he just
Mhm.
presents as things as a historian and how he sees it, and he
Well,
doesn't
and also I
put
take it
down
that
people's
people
faith.
he's like friends with and conversant with are not atheists. So, like one of the books I
Yeah.
think we read in the past, I don't know if we did or not, but Dale Ellison is a person who's not an atheist, who still would profess Christianity even, or James Tabor. I don't exactly know what his faith is, but it's like something like the wave. That'd be cool. His religion is, something like, trying to reconstruct whatever the
Yeah.
Ebionites were teaching and that kind of a thing. So these are, and even that woman, I forget her name right now, who he's on his podcast with, is not an atheist. So like,
Hmm.
they're people of faith, practicing faith. So
Right.
yeah, it's kind of interesting that he's not trying to
Yeah.
he's not trying to like show how stupid they are or something like that. You know what I
Right.
mean?
He's
Like
not going to be in some, what's that movie? Those movies, A Case for Christ, or kind of like some of those. I
Lee
guess that's a book.
Strobel.
Yeah, like that kind of book where, like, oh, be careful of these evil professors. They're trying to turn you away from your faith, and like I
Oh
don't get
right,
that
yeah, yeah,
vibe
yeah.
from here. I don't get that vibe from him either. Like,
Yeah.
he teaches undergrad or did, and I in the South, so I bet he was respectful. I think in just people's faith and their
Yeah,
own
yeah, yeah.
journey.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
were professors I have to say, like, so I went to school in Southern Indiana and um, different people who taught New Testament, and none of them I think were intentionally being condescending. So Luke Timothy Johnson is pretty well-known Catholic. He was my undergraduate New Testament teacher before he moved to Emory. David Brocky, who's a very famous like Gnostic scholar, but he also taught me something from the New Testament. I can't remember what. I don't think it was Gnosticism, but a lot of times they would get into arguments with students, especially in Southern Indiana. And it wasn't intentional. It was just like somebody had just like been scandalized by something that was said during a lecture, gone back to their pastor, and then their pastor armed them with like some biblical like proof
Yeah.
texts or whatever you want to call them, and then sent them back to the classroom. And then they're in these lecture halls with 300 kids, and trying to challenge the teacher in front of everybody else. But I was an undergraduate, and kind of going through it. I had sympathy for the professors, but I also had this kind of like trying to figure out actually. But there were times when I thought, I think they're enjoying like you know
Oh,
totally like smacking down like these
oh,
undergraduates, but
yeah.
fundamentalist, evangelical, whatever background kind of people. Like I think they're kind of like enjoying this or whatever. And but I, they I don't think it was that at all, really. I mean,
Right.
it was. I mean, it had to be those super annoying, and you could tell they would get at least frustrated. Like,
Right.
how many times have they taught an undergraduate New Testament class and had the same objections come up, as they're
Yeah.
teaching like the historical Jesus and not the methods for, figuring that out
Yeah.
or whatever. So
Or
anyway.
even like simple things like, oh, there's places in the Gospels that contradict.
Yeah, and then
Like,
yeah, exactly. They would go back to the pastor, come back like and
yeah.
like explain why John has his whatever it
Right.
is washing of the feet on Thursday night, and all the other guys do it on Friday, and like they'd be like, oh well, it's like the time thing was like referring to the the lunar calendar, whatever. I mean, it wasn't that exactly, but it was just like
Yeah.
anything to make these things harmonize.
Yeah.
Because like there was this idea, yeah, of the evil college professor destroying people's faith, and I don't know. I assume their pastors were like, why did you even take that class? Because like it
Yeah,
was clear that some of the kids in there at least thought like they were gonna like take this thing to prove the professor wrong. It was just like so stupid.
yeah,
I just like wait until I get in there, correct him
yeah.
on this or whatever. But
And I think, and I think the Christian faith throughout history has proven to survive with, any sort of uh, um, discovery or different knowledge. Like it just seems like it's continued to thrive regardless. And I think when sometimes some churches like they flatten out scripture where there's like no nuance, there's no like this is the one interpretation, and it's almost like what do you call it, a house of cards,
yeah,
like where you just pull it out and all falls down, instead of like looking at scripture honestly and seeing the contradictions, seeing that it was written by people, though I believe inspired by God, but within scripture
yeah,
there is like a conversation, there's a
mhm,
struggle, there's doubts
yeah.
that authors express. It's not flat, it's not a flat text. It's very nuanced and multi-layered. And I
Yeah, which
think
has
that and
theological implications for me, that
yeah,
God allows these contradictions, this conversation to come
right,
from
and
him.
these and seeing the Bible like that, I just think it could withstand any sort of scientific discovery or archaeological discovery. I mean,
Yeah, because
at least for
it's
me,
not science. It's like
yeah, it's
yeah,
not.
it's like
Yeah, and so it's
it's
like you're
just yeah.
setting up these kids, like we talk about the deconstruction phenomenon or whatever of, and I feel like they've just been exposed to a type of Christianity where it's a house of cards instead of like expressing like how Christianity is very nuanced. There's different voices that run throughout Scripture. Um,
Polysemy, which
yeah,
are
what's that?
multivocal.
Yeah,
Yes.
multivocal. Yeah, um, yeah, and just it's just too bad. Like they weren't exposed to that, and maybe they would be walking with by faith and would be maybe walking by with Christ if they weren't given, you know, this is the way it is. This is the one interpretation, and all interpretations are wrong.
Yeah.
It's too bad.
I remember in my New Testament class at the where was it? Oh yeah, at the University of Chicago, not my undergraduate one, but my graduate level one, and I was taught by a professor at U of C, Marty Mitchell, and I'm pretty sure, or no, was this in History of Christianity one? No, this was History of Christianity one with Bernie McGinn, and we read Elaine Pagel's um, like the History of Satan or something like that, I think it's called. But anyways, and her whole thing, and I've read like all of her books since then, but like her whole thing is so interesting. Like it's very much in line with this God of love thing, where she wants to include all of the multivocal, multivalent voices of the Gnostics as well, and like show that there's no unity among Gnostics, and they were suppressed because they had different forms of Christianity, as Bart Ehrman writes. I think the book is called Different Christianities or something like that, all in the first century. There's this myth by a lot of different faiths, but one that comes to mind, for example, I mean, you either had the Catholic claim of one church and this apostolic succession from the first pope, who's Peter, and they look at that Matthew passage and say, like, look, here's the first pope, he's been
Mhm.
given the keys of the church or whatever. Or you have this other idea that there was some like perfect, primitive church that and actually our friend David Bentley Hart just wrote a book on this about tradition, where there was this perfect primitive church that was like somehow I don't know, the way it was supposed to be. It was Eden, and then there was this fall from that point. I think I've heard Jehovah's Witnesses and people like that call it like the age of apostasy or something like that, where it's
Mm.
like there was the church, it was established, it was right, it was correct, and so we just got to look back at how that was in Acts. Yeah, good luck reestablishing that
Yeah.
kind of a community. But anyways, look at how it was in Acts, and then like that's what we, that's what we use, and that's what we do to make a community, here on Earth or whatever, because it was one church at that time, and so they see all the different voices that were suppressed by that one church, that were suppressed by orthodoxy, as like a falling away. Whereas Elaine Pagels sees all these voices as great conversation partners, like put them like everybody talking to everybody else. And so, what the Urban book shows us is that like there are a lot of different perspectives in the Bible, and the rabbis before had always treated it as a conversation. And so and like you kind of ask yourself, well, why was redaction in the Hebrew Bible done so poorly? Like
Yeah.
why didn't they make this univocal? And you kind of like look at an actual effort to do that, like a Marcion, which is a type of Gnosticism, his totally getting rid of all the other gospels. I think he just used Luke or something like that.
Hmm.
Luke and Acts, basically, because he wanted to totally have just one version of
Hmm.
Christianity, and then he like got rid of the whole um, Hebrew Bible because like that God was like evil. So it's just
Yeah.
yeah, like that's not the God that Jesus was talking about or whatever. And so you just wind up with this very simplified thing, whereas you have such a richer experience if you can see what all the different voices, and from Elaine Pagel's perspective, those the exact voices that were suppressed for whatever reason. We wind up with a gospel we're going to talk about today, Gospel of Thomas, and a gospel we're not going to talk about today, but like this like Judas gospel, which is total switch around where everything's told from the perspective of Judas as like the one good guy and everybody else is like an idiot and whatever. Like those kinds of things, uh, we do those are all, to me, this is how the God of love speaks, in this radical inclusion where all these voices, including contradictory voices, are included in the conversation, because it's rich to be able to
Yeah.
have these arguments. If I mean, I don't even think it's necessarily a pejorative term, but just different perspectives, different
Yeah.
types of speaking affecting one another. It makes
Yeah.
the way God speaks, or what we mean by inspired uh, scripture or writing or inspired speech or whatever. That for me at any rate, the true speaking in tongues, the true polysemy of like having many voices all at once, kind of like are unified by a particular goal. So like trying to understand the Jesus event, for example, and then allowing people to speak differently. It's just so foreign, though, like to allow different perspectives. It would be great if there was a church that was actually a forum for that. But
Yeah. I mean, I even think of like, we're kind of speaking Western Christianity, but then you have like the Eastern Orthodox Church, and then you have like the Ethiopian, like the Coptic
right,
churches, and they have all different types of books in the Bible, and I know, like, I think the Orthodox Church, they don't believe in original sin. But I think it was Augustine, kind of the father of Western Christianity, maybe. I don't know if that's correct, but kind of established that, it's kind of as original sin. This is interesting. Like, I don't know much about those faiths at all. Like, it'd just be interesting to hear their point of views. And
well,
we're
David
we're
Bentley
for
Hart is our man for that. He's written a
yeah. I
great book
mean,
on universalism for sure.
and
So
we're even fortunate enough that where we worked at a school for ESL students, where we would work with adults, like different teachers and staff that came from all different faiths. Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like Eastern Ethiopian I don't know, Ethiopian Orthodox, or I don't know
Yeah, yeah.
what the right term is. Just interesting. Yeah, it's kind of rich experience, to hear those voices. Um,
And we even went, although it fell apart for all the typical reasons. We even, I put together this Muslim Christian dialogue, and again, like being in dialogue with other, there's not a lot of like, I don't know, ways to do it that have been, forwarded. It would
Yeah.
be cool to like continue to try to figure out like what are ways to have those conversations, because there was a lot of that Muslim Christian dialogue that was incredibly informative and interesting to me. And the problem then became, some people's concern about, we shouldn't be just having a conversation. We should be actively trying to convert people. And I'm just like,
Mm.
this is
Yeah.
no.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also there were other Christians who, like, because I would try to like show the different types of Christianity and the different views that they had, so that when we were explaining a particular scripture and like the ways in which it was taken and different types of Christianity, it was very upsetting to some of the Christians to show that disunity.
Yeah.
And so, because the Muslims, there were certain, so Wahhabi Islam from Saudi Arabia has had a kind of inordinate influence in general, but like here in Columbus, Ohio, it's huge because they've built most of the mosques here with their money, and so like it's it would kind of be like a fundamentalist version of Islam,
Hmm.
and so that's who we were in dialogue with. So they were always presenting a united front. They were always
Right.
presenting like we're one, and then some of the Christians were like, like they're holding this up as like, why they're better than us. And so then you come in here and undermine the whole thing by telling them that
Hmm.
that there's not agreement on things within
Right.
Christianity.
Yeah.
And it's just always like this move that gets made within Christianity, that I'm very familiar with, like that's not Christian or whatever. So like, it was always surprising at our school when like when a more fundamentalist Muslim would say something like, I can't take music class because that's not Muslim or whatever. And anybody who's like listening or singing the music isn't Muslim or whatever. And that's
Hmm.
not true. That it's there's it's Islam also has different viewpoints. It's just that, which is again why like when a West African Muslim would come in, all the other, East
Hmm.
African Muslims would tell them like, oh, you don't wear the hijab, like you're not a Muslim or whatever, and they would be
Right.
like, well, we don't come from that school. But then you started noticing after a certain time, West African Muslims all started wearing hijabs because of the
Yeah.
because the same thing happens within Christianity all the time. And so I just wish there was more of an impulse to include different voices than just like we have to say the same thing. We have to
Yeah.
be on the same page, or otherwise it's not, you're either in or you're out.
Yeah. It's
So
funny. One reason why I kind of wanted to start reading books like this, uh, studying hell, is Kirk Cameron on his
oh
podcast.
yeah, yeah,
He
yeah, yeah,
came out
cool.
and he was talking about he was talking with his son, and they were talking about hell. And Kirk Cameron thought like, well, there's a possibility of like nihilism, and he shared that on his podcast. And oh my gosh, he got a lot of feedback.
It's
And
the predominant view in the Bible. But anyways, yeah.
I know, and I was just like, don't you like? And then I thought like, I'm 51, and so like when I became an evangelical Christian, I started reading some guys that kind of were writing in the 70s and 80s, and one guy was John Stott, and he's a very popular English person that um, he's a popular author, smart guy, and he believed in annihilationism, and he was considered conservative Christian, and people that conservatives read, and a person that conservatives read, and I'm just like, and this is like a basic viewpoint, like like a nihilism, like that's legitimate, and if you just read the text, I don't want to. If you read it plainly, right, quote unquote, I could see how you
It
could come up with
looks a
that.
lot like nihilism. Yeah,
It,
right,
it
yeah, yeah.
looks a lot like a nihilism,
Yeah, yeah,
and I just reading through the Bible, the only part where it talks about kind of eternal flames was in Revelation, and I
yeah.
looked at different statements of faith of some of the church I went to, and the only and then they said, they stated their view of hell, eternal conscious torment, and the verses that they cited was in Revelation, which is
Yeah, which we'll
incredibly
get to.
symbolic,
Yeah. Yeah, right,
which is
exactly. Yeah.
incredibly symbolic. Plus, it doesn't even really talk about someone suffering for
People.
eternity.
Yeah. It's like
It's the actual um, the
death
flames,
gets
the actual
annihilated in
death. The lake was constant, was eternal. Like,
yeah.
you know, not people in it or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. No, people
And
weren't thrown into
and
that
that's
lake. Yeah,
that's
people
just
did
plain. That's just
people
some
did
plain
get their
reading,
yeah, people did
right?
die, but like they died. Yeah, but
Yeah, they
we'll get that
just
later.
were annihilated. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I just remember. Maybe we can get Kirk Cameron on. Maybe we can get Kirk Cameron on.
Yeah,
That would
wow,
increase our
that
views
would
a
blow
little
us
bit.
up. That would really blow us. We'd get big then,
That would be.
for sure, man. Yeah.
I was a big Growing Pains fan, so maybe I'll. Yeah,
All
and
right,
I
well,
think
let's
he's
get into
came
the
out. I think he
book.
came
Yeah,
out. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say that
please, you say
I think Kirk Cameron came out and had questions about uh,
the
eschatology.
rapture.
Started questioning
Yeah,
his
yeah, yeah.
viewpoint. Yeah, which is,
Good. At
he's
least
the
he's
star of
honest. Yeah,
Behind
yeah.
movies.
I know. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
I had a big. Yeah, thankfully, I was aware of a lot of that stuff, but I was not an evangelical, so I wasn't. That was
Yeah.
never anything that was in the Catholic Church at all. I mean, Revelation
Okay.
has always had a very kind of precarious place within the Catholic liturgy. It's read, but it's read as like
Yeah.
this sort of like liberative moment or whatever rather than like
Yeah.
some clear map. Nobody has ever stood up in a Catholic church and like mapped out, like who the whore of Babylon was or whatever. Well, maybe because the church has been accused of being the whore of Babylon. but
That's
but
true.
like like there was never anything like that. The last time we kind of we were getting into the New Testament, and I like this term that Ehrman uses, de-apocalypticize. So this is the general movement within the New Testament. So if you look at some of the earlier sources, I mean, obviously Mark, but also Paul is the earliest. And that's important to keep in mind. Although the Gospels are using sources that probably we don't know when those sources were written down first. We know just by knowing that, for example, Mark was written around 69, 70 AD, whatever, that we don't know what sources he was going off of, what oral traditions, how old those were. We don't, they could predate Paul, but one thing that at least James Tabor makes very clear is that, at least to my satisfaction, is that they probably had some of Paul's writings, and so that Paul's theology was already affecting them. So that even though we often think of like the Gospels as going straight to the source, they actually were using various sources. Again, this constant theme of just the multivocal, like having all these different voices and having to like then kind of weave it together and put it together consistently to greater or lesser degrees, greater or lesser effects, sometimes successfully and sometimes not quite so successfully. So, beginning with Mark, we have this, I don't know, apocalyptic Jesus, let's just say. This is why some people at that
And
time thought we were
apocalyptic
Jesus. Yeah.
and apocalyptic meaning that that the kingdom is going to come physically on earth.
Before this
Jesus would
generation
be the
passes
king.
away. And yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're going to see kind of a change here, though. But like, and so when Bart Ehrman is talking about de-apocalypticizing, he's talking about making Jesus less about like an imminent end, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Um, so then, anyways, Matthew kind of has a little bit more of a combination of sayings, but mostly it is this whole, the end's coming, it's coming soon. And then, that seems to reflect some stuff that's in Paul. Like Paul seems to actually think that, yeah, the end is coming soon. And he changes, even in the authentic Paul, whatever you want to call that, like he changes from extremely sure the end is coming really, really
Mhm.
near,
Yeah.
happening really
Where he would
fast.
say where he would say things like not to marry.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
and those sorts of things. Because why would you? Because Jesus is coming next
Yeah,
week.
and then marriage won't matter at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Don't get married. Yeah,
yeah,
and then he
yeah.
changed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he changed it. I mean, in many ways, I think. So Ehrman thinks that Jesus died an apocalypticist, that Jesus was, you know, in that strain of Judaism that's sometimes called a Essenism, where, you preach the end and, you think it's coming. But I think that there was a transformation in Jesus myself, and that's maybe not just reflected in the writers of the gospel, but also reflected in Jesus himself. So I think the same thing happened with Jesus that happened with Paul. So Paul, totally convinced this is happening imminently, and then kind of realizing towards the end. And I think certainly Jesus realized it by the time he was on the cross, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That, okay, this is not going like I thought it was. And the,
He was deconstructing.
he was pretty deconstructed at that
He
point,
was
man.
being reconstructed as a de-apocalyptic
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
something.
Yeah, he was fully de-apocalypticized at that point. But and you can see the transition more in Luke. So, like, again, in Luke, you get a more of a mixture. But Jesus on the cross in Luke, Bart points out, says, to the thief, "You're going to be with me today in paradise."
Right. Hmm.
Very, very interesting. Not the bodily resurrection, which I guess we should have established a little bit better too. So Paul also believed, as it seemed that Jesus believed to some degree, they preached a bodily resurrection, which seems to be something that went along with being in a scene. So again, there's all this debate about whether it actually was in a scene, or was it like
Yeah.
all what group and this and that. Like, was there a mixture of Essenism and Pharisaicism or whatever, or was there just this one belief that he had? I always think it's a mixture. So,
Yeah.
anyways, he was, for me, still like God incarnate, and whatever that means. So that, that incarnation bit, that meant a limitation of knowing. So that, just like every other human being, he has to, like, listen to, figure out, think on his feet, and change when things don't go how you think it's going to go. And
And a
so,
lot of this was developed. A lot of this was developed during the Intertestament period, Second Temple Judaism, and that's one thing I have to. It's so obvious to me now when I read the Gospels. It's like the Judaism in Jesus's day is really different than Judaism during pre Second Temple Judaism. Very
yeah, and
different.
just as it's multivocal now, it was very multivocal then. So, like,
Hmm.
we've identified, because of Josephus, we've identified basically three groups. But there's a lot of other people that think the groups are way more vast than that. But, like, the basic
Right.
three groups that we think of are the Essenes, who are associated with end times, bodily resurrection, this kind of thing, and then the Pharisees, who are associated with rejection of the temple and sacrifice, and, like, adopting the law and the book, and arguing about the
And
book.
they held to resurrection too, correct? The Pharisees.
I think so. I think that's right. Yeah,
Yeah, because there was
yeah.
that time when Jesus confronted the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and we're kind of like
Right, and the
he was
Sadducees
asking
don't believe in
questions
the resurrection.
yeah,
Yeah,
to get them. I don't know. They were starting to argue together. Like the Sadducees didn't believe in it, Pharisees did.
that's right. That's right.
They were just
Actually, there was the
yeah,
Sadducees who, I think, challenged him by saying, "So, like, what happens if,
yeah,
you're resurrected and you had been married to different people during your life? Like, who's your real
yeah,
marriage partner or whatever?" To try to trip him
yeah.
up. Yeah, because they were, at least we're told, that they were trying to show how stupid the idea of a bodily resurrection was.
Right.
And because they're the older school, Jews who, like, were associated with the temple, and, like, like, yeah, having a priesthood, and that kind of a thing. Whereas, like, yeah, it's clear that the Pharisees, were more into, yeah, the synagogue, so that it's a place of conversation, where people could, argue with each other, and
Yeah.
so, um, but anyway, but again, there's the big argument about, even, oh, we're the people at the Dead Sea. This is now challenged. The community Qumran, were they Essenes? And so like there's various reasons offered why no, they weren't. They don't believe in enough of the things that Jesus, I mean, sorry, that the Essenes were claimed to. I mean, Josephus never said they were in an explicit way, except that he kind of like connects up some of their beliefs. But then, looking back at it, now people are kind of like, they seem to have a bunch of different things that they believe that aren't quite the same. So they might have been another form of Judaism altogether, like this real
Yeah.
tight, strict
Yeah.
priesthood kind of, community. And it's even been discovered now that a lot of those scrolls and things that were found at Qumran were not from the same Essene community. They might have been just a collection of all kinds of different writings, so that there's no way to even get a clear univocal theology that way. So there's just like a lot of like um, there's a lot of ins, there's a lot of outs here, but you don't get univocalities, which you don't get in any
Yeah.
anywhere in the ancient Near East. But like that's what people want. And so like when they describe like the original Christianity of the Book of Acts, that's what we are. We're a
Yeah.
biblical church or whatever. That never was. That's a projection backwards of unity that was never actually there. And I mean, you can
Yeah.
even see in Acts like that, they're arguing with each other. And even,
Yeah.
whoever wrote Luke is trying to like clean it up because he's presenting the whole thing to Theophilus, but he like still leaves all this like, you know, argumentation going on in there, and like then we have the Paul's letters that totally contradict the Paul of the Acts, who's just like, at loggerheads with the Jerusalem community.
And
Um,
even the idea of just the church, the Christian being a separate entity was,
mhm,
you saw it progress, because before it was a Jewish sect. It was the
mm.
people
Oh
of the
yeah, become
way,
separate. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
then slowly but surely they kind of separated.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's clear the community in Jerusalem, so we'll call this like Peter and James's and Mary Magdalene's and Mary's community. It's very clear that they were still within, Judaism in a lot of ways. And then that
yeah,
whole final, I don't know, expulsion or whatever it was, hadn't really taken place at that point. And so and that was a lot of what the argument was, because Paul was, telling people not to get circumcised and stuff like that.
yeah,
So that argument was there, which I think
and
is
that,
so great that that argument is preserved, because you like to see
yeah,
what was at stake. It just it makes it so much more meaningful to see, like, Paul's, kind of overzealousness at times, to be totally free of the law created some problems. For example, at Corinth, very famously, where people were like visiting prostitutes, and one dude was with his stepmom and all this kind of stuff, and it was just like, well, we can. Paul said we're free of the law; we can do whatever we want, and so he has to write
yeah,
back or whatever, and so you can see, it just is so useful and helpful to see those kind of developments, because they still happen at, these arguments still happen at churches today. I mean,
right.
people just like separate and make new churches now, but like Paul was trying to hold the church together. So he tries to
And
make
when you're
amends with the
and when you're
Ebionites by
conf-
bringing them
and when you
stuff.
bring a faith, you bring a faith to a group of people that are different than you. They're going to syncretize,
Right.
their new faith that they adopted and kind of what they've known in their culture. And so I think you see that even in the development of the idea of heaven and hell, where it was a
Totally.
Jewish
Yeah.
religion, and then it kind of evolved into, wait, these are like former pagans, or they're Greeks, they're, well, even like the Gospels uh, they weren't written by illiterate Jews in Judea. It was written in different regions of the Middle East, and had Greek ideas. Am I right in saying that? Or
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, there
yeah,
there are no like original Hebrew versions or Aramaic versions of the Gospels,
yeah,
and most of Jesus's disciples were
yeah,
clearly illiterate. So all of them
right.
probably, the original
And
apostles,
if
I should say.
and even if they were literate, they probably wrote in Aramaic and not Greek, I would
Well,
think.
the Greek would have been, yeah, by people who had been educated.
Yeah, yeah,
And again, it was a
okay,
Koine Greek, so it wasn't like, Greek. It was just like this lingua franca of the region from, back when, Alexander had set up, the satrapies.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like that class who could read and write had been Hellenized, so to speak. So yes, so they were aware of like Greek concepts and Greek ideas, and
Yeah.
so they're gonna always be like as you said before, in that process of syncretism, where they
Yeah.
are trying to translate their culture, Hebraic culture into Greek culture, and then like
Yeah.
what's the right word for this or whatever.
And then, like, I even think of the Bible, like we talk about translating it, the New Testament from Greek to English or whatever, um, and throw in some Latin, I guess. um, but Jesus most likely probably spoke Aramaic, and so did his disciples. So they really had to translate
Yeah.
oral Aramaic
Mhm.
language
That's
into
right.
a Koine Greek. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like a lot of translations right there. Kind of like you play that telephone game.
Yeah, it leaves a lot of gaps, and I
Yeah,
think that you can just like curse those gaps or you could disavow those gaps and deny that there are any gaps in transmission, or you can say like these gaps like they leave room for us to argue. It's like
yeah,
there's like this is where all the creativity happens is like
yeah,
trying to figure out what this message is and how to like not transmit it with total fidelity, except I mean, the fidelity is to love, not to like the A equals A kind of like this is what was said, this
right,
is what was meant, this is like nail it down, this is like a VCR manual, just plug in this and plug that there, whatever. Like that's just not how it is.
yeah,
This is a community of interpreters trying to think on their feet and like thinking one thing, so that what we're talking about right now, thinking the apocalypse is imminent, and then having to de-imitate, well, I guess de-apocalyptize their thinking, which is really evident in Paul. So that's where you first get this idea of like, don't be asking where's this, kingdom coming? Where is it going to happen? Like all these like
yeah,
kind of like time and place things. And then it's just like, no, like don't even, and don't believe anybody who says, oh, it's here, it's there, whatever. Don't,
right,
that's a change, from probably what was originally taught, just because Paul was thinking that and then had to change from that position. And this is a part of like what it means to me to be a community of faith. And that's why to me this is the word of God, because it shows like, hey, you can get things flat wrong sometimes, or you can get things t- not just wrong, but you can you're going to have to take the kernel of whatever was being taught or whatever, and you're going to have to work with it a little bit. So the example
hmm,
that we used last time was as Jesus is tested in the desert, kind of like being presented not as the kind of Messiah that people were expecting. So if you did your good biblical scholarship, as people do now, and they look at what a Messiah was supposed to be, and what Jewish people who formulated the prophets, were formulating the concept of a Messiah or whatever, or whatever was revealed to them by God or about a Messiah. That you could just say they were flat wrong, or you could do what Jesus was doing, which is like saying like, no, I am the Messiah, the one that was foretold, but like here's a really different way of understanding what a
hmm,
Messiah is. Or a lot of
hmm,
like biblical literalists, or just say like scientific literalism, which is like what biblical literalism comes out of, trying to like have an A equals A kind of a, this is either right or this is wrong. Like, this basic what's called correspondence theory of truth is like either the statement can be independently verifiable, either the cat is on the mat or it's not. That's what makes thing either something right or wrong. And so, like, according to those rules, yeah, Jesus was just straight wrong. But we're talking about a different set of rules, which, a lot of people would just find fuzzy or whatever. But like
hmm,
having to reinterpret what messiahship means like I didn't come in power like everybody was thought, and as was foretold, I'm coming in weakness.
hmm,
I'm not a political leader, as was foretold. I am, going to die on a cross, like or
yeah,
whatever. So it's just like it's this constant need to reinterpret things, and very famously, Paul has to look at this phrase, cursed is he who dies on a tree, which was obviously being used at the time against the Christians, and he's got to now do something with that because it's like he's got to reinterpret it. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
it's so like a lot of people just say, "Oh, this is all just fuzzy." Like, you're just making crap up as you go along. Well, yeah, to some degree, but my fidelity is not to a particular like one interpretation. My fidelity is to the love that's revealed by us in conversation, trying to figure out how to love each other
Hmm.
better.
Right.
So and how to live according to like a concern for the poor or whatever. So like these are the principles that seem to have been taught. There were some things that seem to not have been exactly right or whatever, but like this general principle of not only loving your neighbor but loving your enemy and those kind of things, this seems to be pretty at the core consistent. So now we're just going to figure out how to interpret things that make that the ultimate concern or whatever.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. But from Luke and Acts, moving to, the Gospel of Thomas, showing another voice that was suppressed or kicked out of the canon, real early on by the early church fathers. This is where you get the very explicit teaching in Thomas, the kingdom of God is within. And so, like this actual rejection of apocalypticism, which Ehrman makes the point about John as well. Like John is not apocalyptic at all. Again, it's like this. You die, and that's when you're judged. You're either with God or you're, burning or
Yeah.
whatever, or dead or
And
dead and
and where
annihilated.
and as Jesus said on the cross in John, no, wait, and that's Luke. No, Luke, he said, "You'll be with me in paradise."
Yeah.
And
Well,
then okay,
on the
yeah,
cross
John.
in John, he says,
Yeah.
basically says, "My work is finished," or like it's
Yeah.
accomplished. I
Right.
did what I was supposed
Right.
to do, kind of a thing. He's like the Jesus who is super in charge. He knows
Yeah.
exactly what's
Well,
going on.
well, I know that Ehrman says Luke is non-apocalyptic.
Yeah,
John is
right.
anti-apocalyptic, or Saint or Gospel of Thomas is.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Yeah. So yeah,
So,
yeah. It's so yeah. By the time you see, uh, Thomas written probably I don't know, like a 90 or 100, something like
yeah.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a whole slew of Christians that are saying, like actively opposing anybody who thinks the end of the world is coming. Um, you
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
and
I do.
so
I do have a quote uh, in this section. It says, "It is no longer about now and then, but about down and up. This is the beginning of the Christian teaching of hell below and heaven above." So I guess that's a transition where before it was like, you're living in the now, but soon there will be a physical kingdom and your resurrection that you'll be in. But later on, it became more of an up and down thing. You do evil, you go to
yeah, yeah,
hell.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
do right, you go to
Directly after you
or
die. Yeah, that's
go to
right.
clouds. Yeah, I thought that
Which
was a
is
good summation that he had in this book. So,
And we should say too, because what's missing in that is the bodily resurrection, and but there's this weird transition in Paul to like he demands that Christians believe in the resurrection. So this is the whole, if Jesus wasn't bodily resurrected, then our faith is for nothing or whatever. And also just like people asking questions like what is this, like we're going to be resurrected from the grave, and people like kind of like I don't really want my flesh back. Whatever, or you get all these like weird questions about like, well, if I was deformed in life, like am I gonna like my bodily resurrection gonna have the same handicaps or deformations or whatever, or like I don't want this body back. And it's not just also the idea in both Greek and Hebrew culture that the body is, corrupt, fallen. And then, it's like, why would you want that? And so Paul is very careful to formulate a spiritual body. So denying
Yeah.
that flesh and blood can enter the kingdom caused a lot of scandal for people, because it seemed to contradict the resurrection altogether. And so, like, all you had to do, again, the Bible is not univocal. So, like, people would just like quote this part of Paul and then just quote another part of Paul where it was like, no, you need to believe in the actual physical resurrection. And then there would just be all these arguments back and forth because there wasn't a clear answer to any of that. But Paul says, and again, this isn't like doesn't clear it up, but like interestingly, he does say that the resurrection body will not be a body of flesh, and that's kind of consonant with the idea that flesh and blood is not going to inherit the kingdom. So that he's saying that it's not a sark body, which is one of the Greek words. It's a or a soma, which is the Greek word for body. Another so sark would be flesh, but Paul Ehrman makes very clear had a very specific idea about sark, a theological idea, and then soma is another Greek word for body, but like the resurrection would be in a pneuma body or a spirit body. So,
Hmm.
which is the Greek word for spirit or breath. So look, whatever the flesh there, the sark, and this is the theological thing. So it would be transformed from a physical sark to a metaphysical sarx or something like
Right.
that, to a
Yeah.
spiritual flesh, basically. So like that's this thing. And again, you can just see again here with the slippage of words, the difficulty of words to talk about mystical realities and whatnot. You could just see like how this is always open to interpretation. So when people want scientific answers, like will I be able to test the DNA of the flesh, of the resurrection body
Hmm.
and find that it is the exact same flesh as was before?
Yeah.
That's the kind of this is why people say, and a lot of fundamentalist Christians don't understand that because they don't understand a lot of things. But when people say that like fundamentalism or biblical literalism doesn't happen until the scientific resolution and the Enlightenment, it's because it's a reaction. So like to be
Yeah.
able to say, you want to be able to say that what I'm saying about the resurrection or whatever is scientifically third person observable, can be proven, basically. So the cat is
Yeah.
on the mat because I can show you the cat is right there on the mat, and anybody who with eyes can see it. So like, that's a very different kind of thing than what, happens at the end of the gospels, in which, people are sticking their fingers into Jesus's wounds, or Thomas, saying, I won't be satisfied until whatever. Or,
Yeah.
they sit down and they eat and they're finally have this proof that it's a real body because he's actually eating food with them or whatever. We still are in this very like metaphorical, analogical territory, even though it seems like it's somebody trying to do a literal proof of the thing. They had not invented modern science and the criteria of falsifiability in modern science yet at that point. So it wasn't about that kind of rigor or that kind of a truth claim at all. It was about like trying to explain, even like in a poetical way, this was sometimes called theopoetics, like what this resurrection body is going to be. So if you think that describing the flesh that's going to be resurrected as pneuma is going to clear anything up, scientifically speaking, no, it's not.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It is like we talked about this before. It's multi. It's many voices. Like I was just thinking. Yeah. You know, Jesus came to Thomas after he resurrected, and he had, his wounds still there in his resurrected body. So I can see how that, you know, possibly could be an argument of the idea of being resurrected in your physical body. But then Paul does talk about some sort of spiritual realm, a spiritual body, to be, to be a part, you know, to be gone, to be dead is to be with the Lord. So I could And plus, logically, like, what kind of body are you going to have? Are you going to have it when you're 10 years old, 15 years old?
Yeah, another big
I
issue.
mean, are
Yeah,
there going to be a lot of like zygotes running around? I don't want to be funny, but you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
if you believe that's when a person becomes a person, it's that
yeah,
fertilization, and there could be a
yeah,
whole bunch of zygotes hopping. I don't know. It's just
yeah. One of the well,
we're
yeah, one of
talking.
the things the church had to come off of, well, the Roman Catholic Church had to come off of very recently, was they had a strict no cremation stance. This is like, well,
Yeah,
how is
yeah,
God gonna resurrect the body if you cremate it or whatever?
yeah.
And so like it's just a realization that literalism is not where we're at. We're not talking about scientific
No.
understandings of a body. We so like so they basically what the church said is like if God needs to reassemble every cell of your body, then he can do it even if it's been cremated. Like it's like he can go find
Hmm.
all that matter that was in your body and put it back together. But the funny thing about that, and some of the very early church fathers realized it too, in their rejection of resurrection is like because very early on the question was like, well, what if somebody like a Christian martyr is eaten by animals and like once they're eaten by the lion, like the cells of the martyr become a part of the lion cells or whatever. Like, or what about cannibals? That was another question too. Like what if you eat is a cannibal like eats and then that those cells become a part of the cannibal cells, and then the cannibal gets saved or whatever. Later on, rejects his cannibalism, like
Yeah.
but the scientifically understanding, we know the whole point is moot because your cells are always leaving your body. Your cells are totally new, like from
Right.
from matter that's recycled matter, probably that were in other people's bodies at some other point. Given a long history, uh, reusing proteins or even simpler elements of matter over time. Like yeah, so it's like it does not make any sense scientifically,
and
but
even
that's not the point.
even the Eucharist, like where you know where Jesus said, like, this is my body, this is my blood. You're eating my flesh. Like we know it's not. Well, I know Catholics would whatever. Catholics would say it's a mystery, I guess, right? Like
Yeah,
just
yeah,
somehow you're
yeah.
right. But like you said, it's just kind of like here is describing this is the actual flesh and blood of Christ. But we know it's more
Yeah, it was
symbolic,
another mistake
you know.
made in the church at
So
times. I mean, I was told like really early on it was in transition within the church like not to bite into the Eucharist because it would like bleed
yeah,
in your mouth or whatever. You needed to let it
yeah,
melt in your mouth, and just like like there all kinds of things like that can creep up because we tend to be very literal minded, like
yeah,
because we're in a scientific era at this point, and so the deal is like when those things crop up, we have to be like, no, it's spiritual, blah blah blah, whatever. We don't really know what the heck that means, but like, yeah. So there's your mystery thing, and like even like some of the
yeah,
doctrines of around that transubstantiation, that there's even been a
hmm,
realization at this point there's not like it's not a substance, like we're not in substance ontology at
right,
all. We're in a kind of like spiritualized version of substance maybe, or essence or
yeah,
whatever, but it's like it's not something that can be worked out scientifically, or even with like
right,
logical positivism or whatever. So like it's just like, are we allowed to speak metaphorically? Are we allowed to speak analogically? And we always have been until somebody comes along and says, no, we want to be just like science, and we want to
yeah,
like be able to make unequivocal statements about the truth that are independently verifiable. And that always winds up in the hypocrisy of like, yeah, biblical literalism, where like, yeah, you take some things like as you think literally, but you're interpreting things all the time. So yeah.
yeah. I think Rachel Held Evans said something. If you take certain verses literally, what did she say? She said you would be you like if you say you take Bible verses literally, you would either be a liar or really poor. Referring
Yeah,
to like
well,
selling
yeah,
your
that's right.
possessions and
Yeah, yeah,
things
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's funny. It's funny. I go to like a non-denominational church, and our communion. We have grape juice, but then we have crackers. Like, it might I don't know what kind of crackers it is. It's not like the special
Unleavened
wafers.
bread. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's not like the special wafers that were very
Yeah, right.
tasteless, and but it's being a Catholic, a form. I guess I'm still Catholic. I guess technically, I don't know, um,
Right,
but
right.
but when people take communion, we do it at one time. You know,
Yeah.
and it's just funny just hearing everyone chew the body of Christ. I just thought, man, an old school Catholic would be like,
Yeah,
"What's going on?"
yeah, no, it's sacrilege.
I
Right.
know.
Well, yeah, there was all kinds of weird problems too. Like if you dropped one on the floor, you still had to eat it. It was the
Yeah.
body of Christ. If you like
I
spilled some of the wine,
yeah.
like you had to like clean it up with a sacred towel that had to be like cleaned in the right way. It's just like
I
crazy
used to
stuff.
I used to go into Catholic school. I don't know, stupid middle schooler. But like at the time, like you could take it by your hand. You could, you know,
Yeah.
a priest or whoever could put it in your hand, or you can take it by the mouth. You just stick your tongue out. And just being a middle schooler, I would always stick my tongue out, just take it that way.
Put it on
Not,
there.
not because I was extra spiritual, but because I wanted to, I don't know, make my teacher feel
Yeah.
uncomfortable. I don't know. I just remember
Yeah.
that.
So
Yeah.
right, yeah. So like there's just so much literalizing things that happens, as a reaction again, to science, the scientific revolution, and then there's just so much need to deliteralize something, which is like
Yeah.
what we're talking about in terms of like literalizing the eschaton, the apocalypse, whatever, and then having to de-apocalypticize the teaching. So now
Yeah.
we're and what does it mean to de-apocalypticize it? It means to either take it more metaphorically, like, yeah, the kingdom of God is coming, it's already but not yet, sort of a thing, or it's already in you and it's going to like follow in some independently verifiable way later. But like, it's just like, yeah, you're having to now scramble. So people often ask, why, if somebody is an apocalypticist nowadays and they make a prediction with a date and time, and it doesn't happen, like why doesn't their whole movement fall apart? And that's what Jehovah's Witnesses are. That's what Seventh Day Adventists are. They are failed apocalypticists, millennialists, whatever you want to call it. And so, but and eventually, what happens is they stop. They either do one of two things: they stop preaching uh, the apocalypse as much, at any
Hmm.
rate,
Hmm.
or they metaphorize it to some degree. So that's kind of like what Ellen White does in the Seventh Day Adventist reinterpretation, as her role as prophetess after the Great Disappointment was to be like, yeah, you know, Jerusalem was reestablished, the temple was cleansed and rebuilt, but it was like a heavenly temple or whatever. You've got to now, so it's like it seems sort of laughable, but you do have to do something like that in general with, and you got a stomach for it or you don't.
Hmm.
So like because I'm a person who's also trained in poetry and English literature and that kind of a thing. Like I value poetic uses of language. So I
Yeah.
and I value interpretation. And if there's one thing they teach you is there is no correct or final interpretation if you take a literature course. There are wrong ones for sure. So like this is not total relativism. This isn't the perspectivalism where anything goes. This is like your interpretation has to be able to stand up to scrutiny, including various sets of criteria. Which for me, the most important criteria is love. So either it's loving or it isn't, basically. And there's
Hmm.
multiple ways to be in loving relation.
Hmm.
But sometimes it's hard to figure that out. But without a doubt. Yeah. So I guess next time we got um I don't think I think we're
Revelation.
good. We got Revelation and then
Yeah.
into the Gnostics a bit more. Um
Yeah.
I would just end with Luke again, and Bart's long interpretation of the Lazarus passage, where he really shows that the point of it wasn't to establish a theological point about eternal conscious torment, which is how some people take it. The point of it was to teach a basic principle. You call it like about how we should treat each other. So Lazarus not being able to uh, I don't know, renegotiate like with
Hmm.
God after the death and all this kind of stuff makes it seem like it's about a real theological idea about eternal conscious torment. Like, man, once you're there and you're going to burn or whatever, unquenchable, because that even describes it in the Lazarus passage, that unquenchable, thing or whatever. So you're going to have to at some point metaphorize or make it an analogy of some kind, rather than literalize something like that, because it's very clear in that passage that what's being taught about is this preferential treatment, you could say, of the poor, but also if you have money, and you don't have any time for somebody who needs help, then there's a problem there. That kind of indicates your lack of heart, your love of people that are other than you. And so, yeah, it's a kind of burning. It's a kind of awful way to live and be. And then, what it looks like there, though, um, is not maybe a place to get real clear theology from, other than
Hmm.
that.
Right.
So I don't know if you had any last thoughts or on that or anything else.
Um, no, I just have my notes pertaining to the Lazarus and the rich man is he said that turning to God is not simply a matter of mental assent. The rich need to give their wealth to help the poor.
That's
Um,
perfect.
so,
And that's the
and
point. And then the point is not about eternal conscious torment.
no, and I think I'm kind of starting to read his newer book, Bart Ehrman's newer book, uh, Love Love Thy Neighbor, I think it's called.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah, it is.
And he said in Greek culture, the idea of loving your family and your friends is something that they valued and was part of a good life. But Jesus came on the scene and said, yes, you love your family, love your friends, but love the stranger was was a he's I think he said like kind of a radical teaching, the idea of
Yeah.
loving your enemies. Um, and so I just look at this and that story about helping the poor. I mean, it's just not your family and friends. It's the person that you don't know that's across. Well, not at the time, but today, loving your neighbor is loving the person maybe you've never met that live on the other side of the world. And he said that teaching is foundational in Western society. And and I guess he's getting a lot of
Not that
positive
anyone does
feedback.
it, but yeah.
No, well, I mean they do to some
Yeah,
extent.
yeah,
I
yeah. I know,
mean,
I know, I know.
you know, I mean, and just he
If
says
that's
he's
what
getting
your
a lot of
salvation relies on, though, we're in
right,
trouble. I'll just say
right.
that.
But
So,
he's got a lot of positive feedback from Christian apologists, actually, this book, because it really paints the teachings of Christ very positively. Um,
and to me, it's like
yeah,
again, it's like if you're understanding his teachings as like this as like the radical sacrifice, to be radically inclusive, that is like that's exactly what I mean by how I think good interpretation should be. It should be about and why it's the word of God to me, because it teaches about
yeah.
this challenge, but also the gift, the grace, that love is. And so, it's sort of like going through some of those difficulties and challenges, and trying to clarify, what love entails. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
that. I say amen to that.
and I'm going through this summer. I'm doing a Bible study um, of the Gospels, and we're just reading. Like this week, we're reading Matthew, and we'll talk about it on Wednesday, and then we'll do Luke and whatever. And just as I'm reading all the way through it, it's just in big chunks. I mean, it's just so many of people that Jesus showed his love to was kind of just the marginalized of his society. from Samaritans to lepers to centurions, and um, those in his day that were just like outcasts that good religious people would not associate with, and that's applicable today.
Yeah,
We
and I
still
like
have
the
that.
idea too that do this when asked, what do I need for the kingdom? Do this. Do
Yes.
act like this. And so it's
Yeah.
not about avoiding hell. I mean, that's why I think
Yeah.
I called the last podcast "Hell Ruins Everything." This is what I mean, because
Yeah.
like what it's about is inhabiting the kingdom now. If you want the kingdom, here's what you do, and
Yeah.
so it's just like the kick out the hell part because it makes everything else
Yeah.
transactional and economic and
Yeah.
like oh, I'm a
Yeah.
good boy because I did this, so I get this reward. Like we don't want that. It's not loving.
Yeah.
So
No. And it prevents you from actually doing the teachings of
that's
Christ.
right. It's
Yeah.
directly linked. That's why I always say eternal conscious torment, even hell to some degree, is like at least the way we take it is like a lie from the
Yeah.
pit of hell. So
Yeah.
only so anyways, all right. Thank you, Kevin. This was a
Yeah.
good one.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Look
was
forward to doing this again.
awesome. See you
All right,
later.
man. Yep.